if you investigate your feelings about death, you're going to get to know yourself. You're going to get more comfortable with this fear of emotional pain. You're going to get more comfortable with normal emotional pains of life. And then you'll be able to be more, I'd say, objective about your relationship with death. Most people, the fear of death is unconscious. It's just like most of our other core fears that run us. They couldn't tolerate it. They could not tolerate the terror that they might momentarily experience.
You are now entering the container.
The container is now open. This is a special episode. Susan Campbell helped launch authentic relating in the Aughties. With books like Getting Real, she really pioneered this new way of organizing our personal relationships and even our relationship to ourselves around authenticity, honesty, integrity. To hear her tell it, she's standing on the shoulders of giants, but she herself became quite the giant. And as soon as you listen to her talk, you can feel that wisdom. In the show notes, we have a link to our first conversation with her that goes into this unique way of living life. But on today's episode, we're doing something different. We're talking about death and our relationship to death. It's a really important conversation for me because I found that the fear of death has been a really major and persistent part of my experience of life. From anxiety attacks as a small child up through today, this unbearable enormity, this big black ocean has really haunted me. And I know I'm not alone in that. And I think even people who don't feel that fear of death directly often end up feeling it in a million little ways as it kind of seeps in under the surface. And Susan really does an amazing job of talking to us about just how important and beautiful this fear really is, and how when we really hold this fear and listen to this fear, we learn about ourselves. And it reminds me of an incredible spiritual working I got to go on after this interview took place, led by a spiritual brother and sister that allowed me to look at death and not so much stop being afraid of it, but start allowing myself to be afraid of it. And that was all adding up to this season of death working and going into Lent and facing Easter. And it all felt really powerful and aligned. And then I experienced death in my life. And now, between me recording this intro and the me who recorded the interview with Susan, there's been a death. It's mysterious and painful, and it's just so impossibly deep. But at the same time, through all of this, the long, dark, cold winter has opened up to all the infinite possibility of the many-colored spring. Sai and I give you this interview in hopes that it helps you really embrace this spring. Not by shielding yourself from the reality of death, but by helping you hold yourself in this magical world where death is a necessary and, in its own way, magnificent part of it. Before we go into this interview, I'd like to thank our patrons. They went to patreon.com/thecontainer and they give us small monthly donations. Not because we offer free tote bags, we don't really have an operation that can do that, but they did it because they want to support this show. They want to support the work we're doing. There's very little media out there that focuses on looking at the world through the lens of the relational arts, and it is not free to put on this show. So their contributions really matter to the survival of the container. And so we really, really want to give a deep thank you and deep bow. Also, if you like Susan Campbell's work, the main thing you should do is go into the links below, go to her website, sign up to her newsletter. It's really well worth subscribing to. It's free, it's in depth, and it's really quite wonderful. And her writings on death on her newsletter are what led to this episode. You should also definitely, if you haven't, check out her books. In particular, Getting Real. This book helped launch the authentic relating movement. So it's like just required reading. Go out, buy this. Also, if you are in a romantic relationship and you would like for it to become your pathway to enlightenment, get Susan Campbell's book, From Triggered to Tranquil. Sai and I have used this system in this book to incredible results. And now it's my joy to present to you our discussion with Susan Campbell on death. I guess really I would like to start by handing it over to you to hear your thoughts. Something you've been writing a lot about lately in the last few months is the process of dying and how we relate to death, which is something it's just so serendipitous. Sai and I are working a lot of um, doing a lot of spiritual work around death this season. So it seemed like this was very perfect. And I imagine you have a lot of thoughts just on that, on how we relate.
How people relate to dying. Well, there's the concept of death, which I'm going to say people have all kinds of feelings about the concept. And then there's like my own death. And when it gets to my own death, I would say majority of the people don't like to talk about it. But I'm not sure. It has to do with the generalized fear of discomfort in our culture, at least. See, I think the generalized fear of uncertainty, the fear of the unknown, and all kinds of survival fears, which I'll get into a little later, because all of these things inform how we hold death and how we relate to death. So first, let's just the concept of death is kind of an abstract thing. So maybe we could just feel into that abstraction. Well, it has a lot of associations to it. It has deaths that I have been close to, people close to me who have died. So how we relate to death has a lot to do with who died, how young, do I have children? Do I have siblings that I'm afraid they might die, maybe because of their lifestyle? Or, most parents have a fear of their child's death somewhere back there. Oh, why do we see all this overprotectiveness in some families? So, what you bring to the concept of death has quite a bit to do with your own life experience. And I would argue your whole experience of how you relate to fear in general. And that's now I don't mean the concept of fear, I mean actual fear. I think we're all riddled with all kinds of fears that have to do with the fear of emotional pain. So to me, that's the core of anybody's relationship to the concept of death. It's because it brings up some kind of painful, awkward kinds of feelings. But I would say, in general, there are some similarities of how people relate to death. And then I'd like to talk about just a few of the opposite ways of relating to death. But most everybody has sadness associated with the ending of someone's life, even if they're old. But if they're younger and it's an untimely death, generally there's more sadness, I would say. This is kind of like normal stuff. Um, Most people handle, kind of agree, it's a social agreement among cross cultures to handle a dead body with a certain amount of reverence. So that indicates kind of a reverence for life, and death is part of life in that sense. So I'd say those are a couple of places where everybody agrees, and almost everybody has some kind of fear of an unpleasant aging process. No. So, just as I say these things about most everybody, perhaps our listeners could go, well, no, I'm not like that. I don't fear the aging process. I work out every day. I'm going to live to 105. Great. So these are generalizations, folks, and they're not right. They're not suggesting right or wrong. Even the part about be, being fearful of emotional pain. Maybe you go, no, I've done a lot of personal work, and I'm, just let it happen. Whatever is that kind of thing. But most people, you know how you know that almost everybody's run by a fear of emotional pain? Because they fear things like rejection, abandonment, being invisible, being ignored, being overwhelmed. Oh, it indicates to me that there's a general lack of safety, a feeling of emotional safety in the world. And that's part of what our movement, authentic relating, circling, getting real, our movement is all about creating more social safety for one another and knowing how to do that. Um, so I'm not talking specifically that much about death, because death is kind of a metaphor in some ways
Mm,
for, it's like a stand-in for all these other survival fears, because basically the human body is wired to survive. We have this part of our brain that's always searching for danger, and so that's the core motivation in humans who have a body. I mean, yeah, when you have a body, you have that strong survival fear. Um, I remember one time my boyfriend didn't call me back when he said he was, and I go into this thing that I call survival panic. I didn't even know about trigger work then. I was a teenager, but I go, no, this feels like I'm going to die. I can hardly breathe. That's called being triggered. But awareness of your triggers and investigation into all those survival fears is something I recommend generally. But I think, and maybe I'll get into this a little more later, I think everyone ought to be more curious about how they relate to their own fears, and learning good ways to relate to our own fears.
mm,
Now, there's tons of ways that people differ, and I'll just mention a few key ones. Differ in terms of how they relate to death. Uh, some people believe that the spirit lives on after death, and some people don't. Uh, some people believe that there's like um, an okayness. That you own your body, and there's an okayness to consciously end your life. And other people think that's messing with nature or with your religious beliefs, the natural way of life. And, I wrote a blog where I'm somewhat in the middle about that. Is it really okay to end my life if something happens that makes me want to end my life? I generally think of external things like war, for me, social chaos. That might make me want to end my life, but who knows? That's a fantasy. Um, but I also really feel something like nature intends us to not always take control of the unknown, that there's almost, in my world, something kind of sacred about holding the mystery of these kinds of things and not needing to know everything. So, back to that, people who have strong beliefs about what happens after you die, where do those beliefs come from? Do they come from your cognitive style, your cognitive biases, your need to believe in something to help you feel secure? Just like investigate that. And I guess my own interest is how do we help everyone be more comfortable with uncertainty? Because that really is part of life. And so death comes in here because it's uncertain what happens after death, but some people have had enough experiences, like mystical experiences or something, that they're pretty sure they know. Other people have beliefs, religious beliefs, and so they're pretty sure they know too. So those are some ways people differ. Uh, there's lots more, but that's a good start.
I'm curious, Susan, as I'm hearing you, I'm thinking about, I guess, what your thoughts are and also your own experience is with the inner work
Mhm.
and doing, the practices that we're so in love with, these of circling, authentic relating,
Mhm.
um and getting more and more comfortable, especially like with triggered to tranquil was a perfect, like the like giving yourself compassion, allowing yourself to feel that
Yeah.
emotional pain, building capacity for the emotional pain. Does that translate to like more of a comfort or a more of a like less fear of death? I don't know.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. I think investigating our own trigger reactions, which has to do with, okay, something happened that was unpleasant, and I intentionally allow myself to feel it, and I bring some tenderness and compassion toward that hurting, scared part of myself, and so forth. So that's shorthand for trigger work. Um, I think doing that kind of investigation helps us understand how the ego mind works, because the ego mind is the part of the mind that's has most of us under its control. Um, and it's full of protection patterns. Like I mentioned, cognitive biases of this sort or that, like needing to know, that. And so when you need to know in a kind of a patterned way, you fill in the blanks. You see something ambiguous and you go, oh, that's not a problem, that type of thing. You just make up an answer to something ambiguous. Um, so all these cognitive distortions that come from having fear of emotional pain are protection patterns that we learned often in childhood through being having our needs neglected, trauma, that sort of thing. So we learn these protection patterns, and if you can do this kind of inner work on any fear that comes up for you, or any painful event that causes a fight, flight, freeze, you will learn how your own mind works. You will learn that, oh, I learned to go into denial when when somebody told some authority told me that my view was wrong, and I just got confused, and then I go, okay, you're right, uh, and I never questioned authority again. That's just a kind of a small example, but some of us have these different patterns. Like they always look on the bright side and they want to always make everybody feel comfortable, and then some other people are more suspicious. These are your cognitive biases. Your suspiciousness is functional to some degree, but it's a pattern. It's automatic. You need to investigate these things. And so many things that lead to our beliefs about death and even our attitude are of this nature, that the mind isn't always trustworthy, the ego mind. The protection patterns were necessary when we were little. We still carry those same defense mechanisms, those same frozen places that got initiated and got those protection patterns got turned on when we really needed them, when our survival seemed to be at stake, like you're a little baby in a crib and they're letting you cry and they're ignoring you. I mentioned that was kind of my story. So, I have a bias toward being big and strong and self-sufficient. Don't worry about me. So, I recognize that as a pattern. So I need to consciously work against that when I see it going on. Now, how many people do that kind of work that's going to give you a
Mm.
more realistic picture of what's really dangerous and what isn't? Um, so back, back to death. Death is just one of the many projection screens that we like put our fears on. In some, I mean, death is death. It's a factual reality, but if that's all it was, we wouldn't even be having this dialogue. It's just death is death. Who needs to talk about it? Because we pin so many different meanings onto it, but so basically the main point here is get to know how your mind works and investigate all your fears.
Hmm.
Just the fear of death, but well, let's say the thought of the fear of death or the thought of death comes. Notice what you feel, what you sense, what goes on in your mind, memories of deaths that you have been near. Um, just this is trigger work. You can do inquiry about any unpleasant bit of your life. You just start with whatever. Oh, my fear of death. Just like, oh, I fear something. I fear death. Oh, okay. I'm curious about that. There's some tenderness in here that I'm open to feeling and giving some self-compassion to. But let me also look for the other associations, like I mentioned before, a death of someone close to you. So when you start investigating these sort of unpleasant feelings and events, you do get free of those automatic conditioned defenses like the need to deny or sugarcoat a difficult thing or the need to frame everything in positive or frame everything in negative terms. Those are
Or
like the
control, for example.
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
all your fears of not having control of things. That would be huge one that would, you'd get there if you investigate your feelings about death or a particular event around the idea of death. Um, you're going to get to know yourself. You're going to get more comfortable with this fear of emotional pain. You're going to get more comfortable with normal emotional pains of life. And then you'll be able to be more, I'd say, objective about your relationship with death. It just won't carry so many projections about, oh, I don't know, either exaggerating it or minimizing it, basically. So I think, no, that's sort of like the the advice part. Uh, how different people just hold death in general is also something we probably want to talk more about and about ourselves too around that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I
where do
mean,
we go next?
something that immediately comes up for me is my own experience with the fear of death has been
Mm,
defining to a lot of my psychology throughout my life. And I can remember being a little kid and routinely like waking up my mother and being like needing help coming down from like my anxiety ratcheting up around like what what's death like, and is it okay? um I mean, very from a, as I mean I can remember these are like some of my earliest memories is me seeking
yeah.
comfort from my mom around the concept of death. And it's been something that has um brought with it so much pain and so much anxiety that I have become both fascinated by it and have sort of an aesthetic kind of almost erotic love for the gothic and the death and the dark and spooky scary.
Yeah.
And I get a lot of my spirituality kind of is like I often think like the spooky feeling is for me like that's the route to the mystical for me. But
Yeah.
I'm saying all that because I actually like have never really done what you're describing, which feels such a great use for something that so reliably blows me out, is
Yeah.
to, when it blows me out, um, notice the way my ego identity is sorting that energy. Like, how does it act underneath that intense energy and fear? Like, there's almost a way that death, if you're able to acknowledge you're afraid of death and really feel into that, there's probably going to be no fear bigger. So there's a way that it's like the ultimate trigger yoga or something.
I agree with that. I think it's ultimately all these fears are fear of death,
Mm.
is what I believe, based on working with a bunch of people. And what I'm drawn to investigate with you, I'm not going to invite you unless we decide to do that later. I'm not going to invite you to go into trigger work exactly, but what comes to me is I wonder how old Jonathan was when he first learned about death. Maybe he was so young that it was like a shock to him in some way. The life is safe and warm, and then boom, what's that? What? I don't know. Does that ring any bells? That was just a fantasy I had.
But yeah, it's interesting. My first 3 years, there were two extremely big deaths that I experienced in my first 3 years of life. One was with my great grandmother who we lived with,
Wow.
and then the other was my father. So there, it was like kind of like before my uh I like fully arrived
That's right.
in, before the ink was wet on my soul
No,
contract.
that's right. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
No wonder, Jonathan. Really, that's huge.
Yeah.
And you
Even if,
might,
and it's interesting because yeah, I mean, I don't know how those deaths were communicated to you, or in what way you were like, how you were held in the household, or in the way that those things occurred. But I imagine that that probably contributes as well.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe like, if you just heard, you see adults around you having
Mhm.
emotional experiences, and like you're hearing that it's because of this death thing, versus, I don't know. I don't know which one would be more intense, like being sat down as a 3-year-old and talked to directly about the nature of mortality, or just happening to hear about it and seeing people upset around you. I guess both are
Mm.
pretty intense.
It's not going to, at three, it's the words are not going to matter, although how you're held is probably one factor. But I'm saying to myself, that age, it's going to be a shock to any little child's system, especially two people who are so close to you. And, I want to just pause, all of us, anybody listening, and just have a moment of tenderness for that 3 year
Mm.
old. Oh, God. Oh. And it's created part of your path. These dramatic experiences, and some of them are traumatic just through no fault of your families or anything, but it puts you on a certain path. And as I say that, I have kind of a feeling of reverence for you and your path. Me, on the other hand, my grandmother died when I was in my 20s. And we were close, but we expected her to die. But I haven't had any friends die. I mean, my parents died in a timely way, although my father was, I thought, a little young. He was 82. My mother, and they were both ready when it got to the illness part. But my father, up until about 6 months before he died, he was like fit. And so that has something to do with it for me. I mean, he was planning a whole new life. He just had some uh, surgery done on his eyes so he could see better. And and I got so sad. I was so sad around my father's death because it was untimely the way I saw it. And for me, that has a huge, that always has had a huge impact. What age did they die and how close were they to you? And what age, I mean, what age did they die? And I hadn't thought of what age, like just now, I'm now thinking, what age was I? But I nothing, nothing happened. So I'm much less I'm spend much less time thinking about death than you, Jonathan.
Yeah, I've had when I think about it, it's actually kind of bizarre. I've had an enormous number of suicides to close people in my life. I mean, I think probably way higher than the average person. Um, in very different connections, like a very close friend, a relative, a student. I'm a teacher, a 12-year-old student. And then my mother's death, you could be argued that it was a suicide and that she drank herself to death, like intentionally. She didn't want to be here anymore. Um, and that was during my Saturn return, my
Mhm.
early 30s. Um, and was actually like so life changing in a positive way. It's almost like the reason I believe that I'm sober today, that I stopped drinking, was because of the way that she died, when she died, in my path of becoming sober, um and so I see it now, like in this, like she died so that I could live,
Wow.
you know um
Mm.
and I think she would agree, interestingly.
Wait. Mhm.
There's a story in there's a lot, women in my family don't live very long, or historically, and
Yeah.
so I have this drive to like break that pattern, to be the one that um does live long.
That has me think about, on like a mythic level, how much death is part of your fate and your fortune. It's the story's not really over until you're dead.
Mm,
And so as long as you're alive, things can go for the better or you can lose it all. There's a
Yeah.
way that death creates certainty once it happens. And
Yeah.
it's like, in the grand tale of someone's death, one of the best ways you can end it. We always like want the tale to end like he died happily in his sleep, or surrounded by loved ones. It's just get to the good death. The good death feels like it seals. Yeah, which is that's I'm connecting that to what you were saying earlier with how much meaning we're all of these added things to death that aren't just death itself. It's these other
yeah,
things.
Yeah.
that good death, it's there is, yeah, that like really uh that to me it like really touches into my desire to control. Like if I can orchestrate exactly how it would go, then somehow that's going to relieve the pain, that emotional pain that I feel when I think about it. Or the fear of the fear of uncertainty, the fear of the unknown. Like those are the ones, like
Mm.
those two. I think that's what you started this whole call of saying,
Yeah.
is the fear of uncertainty and the fear of the unknown
Mm.
are really like the things.
Yeah. So let's all investigate that. If you're at all interested in this topic, investigate, meaning what unknown am I afraid of? Here's mine. My unknown that I'm afraid of is, when will I die? Because I feel so much juice for life and for the stuff I'm doing. On another hand, I feel complete. I have nothing left on my like bucket list. And I'm aware of this desire for control, so that I know that I really have all my ducks in order for for the people who survive me. Um, I cleaned out my attic. And after I cleaned up my attic last summer, I go, now I can die in peace. Although now I realize there's more loose ends. And, oh, I have to change my executor on my trust. I'm leaving a mess here if I die now. That is me. I want I want to not uh, back to not be a burden. I want to handle everything myself. That seems to be my
Whoa.
story. I want to have like my parents did. They have the burial plot already paid for and prearranged. Everything's prearranged. So I guess that's part of my family too, is actually not being a burden on others. So now I'm kind of smiling. Everybody's like that. So the unknown, that's what's gotten me interested in rationally, consciously choosing my own time and place and method of death. As I said in the beginning, I'm in two minds. I'm of two minds about going that route. There's the final exit network, and they teach you all these different ways of. I just, to myself, I call it different ways of offing yourself. It's not culturally appropriate language, because because the people who do passionately believe in this, they call it self-deliverance, you know,
Mm.
like really delivering yourself from some unpleasantness that you have the right to do. And it's a political movement. And, state like West Virginia is outlawing medical aid in dying, which is the most conservative. That isn't even self-deliverance. That's just, you get two doctors to say you're terminally ill, and then they'll help you die. A lot of states have that, but so it's a very political thing right now, a very passionate thing for a whole lot of people, and more all the time. I'm seeing more and more webinars come up about that. I wrote one blog about it on Substack. Uh, People are asking me to speak on that now. As I told you guys, I'm not a death expert here. I'm just sort of facing death,
Yeah, you've never even
fairly,
done it. How can you be
fairly
an
soon, and so that unknown kind of plagues me. I just have to
Yeah.
say it that way. I don't obsess about it, but it's like I sure wish I knew the exact time and place so I could have a party, and have a eulogy so I could hear it all, whatever. That would
Mm.
be the biggest thing, the eulogy. It was just to have, to have a real nice party, and maybe do something with psychedelics as part of, um, maybe not as I'm dying, but a lot of psychedelics before I die, just to
That
familiar with that transition between me and not me.
Yes.
that has me wonder about using psychedelic medicine while you're alive to confront
While you're alive.
and consider and embrace death. I'm thinking specifically of 5-MeO DMT. And if you have, yeah, like what's your experience with that medicine as a way to engage death?
I like that medicine for that purpose. I had two kind of different experiences on 5-MeO DMT. I mean, I've had some couple of just the person didn't know what they were doing, the shaman who was helping, so I don't count those. But one, I didn't get enough of the medicine, and so what I got to was still very profound. It was the whole time, it wasn't very long, 15 minutes, but I felt like my body just wouldn't relax. And then I realized the body is kind of always in a slight bit of tension. In
Hmm.
order to stay in a body, you're carrying a certain amount of tension just to keep yourself upright. But even lying down, I can pretty well completely relax when I'm lying down. But even that, it's got some tension to it. So I was aware a body is not like totally at peace ever. And I got sad and I said, oh, this body's like a weight around my neck and, if I could just release this body. Okay. So then the next one, I got my wish, and I was completely gone, no body at all. And I would just say, pure awareness, just energy, vibration, bliss, and the word relaxation doesn't even touch it, like beyond relaxation, zero. And I had an awareness that there was, well, actually, I don't know if I did have an awareness that there was a body somewhere in the picture, down there somewhere on Earth. But, it was just, I was just energy, and I loved it. And so I said to myself, well, this really gives me an idea of what might go on, at least for a little while after I leave my body, because they say that's the chemical that I guess it's your pituitary gland secretes at the moment of death. So, um, moment of death might be an hour that you have that experience, and then who knows? So some of these people who come back and say, "Oh, it's heaven, it's beautiful," I go, "I'm not sure. How long were you dead?" you know.
Right.
Anyway, that's off topic, but I learned to do it myself. I became, because I like practices. So I called it practicing dying. I got a copy of the music because it's a whole 1 hour piece of music. It's called Oma the Goddess by Joe St. Clair. I put that in one of my blogs. It's a fantastic piece of music for practicing dying. So, because that was the music that the shaman played when I was out, and that really facilitated what was going on. And so then I would lay in my bed and play that music and just go back as close as I could to that state. And you can voluntarily bring in some of these states with enough practice. And so I did that for a long time. I'm not actively practicing that now. I guess I'm less interested in death than I used to be, or something. Because I thought it was going to come sooner. I had a thing that I called a heart event. It had nothing to do with my heart. I learned that later. But for 4 years, I thought I was about to have a heart attack. So I think then I was more interested in death. Now I know what's going on, and I do have a blood disease that used to make me out of breath. But now I'm on some medication, and I thought the out of breathness was my heart, and it's not. So now that don't have any physical disabilities, I feel like I'm going to live forever again. It's funny, you can come back from over the hill. Don't count yourself out. It's not over till it's over. So now, I feel so great. I don't even hardly think about death except in a more academic way, frankly. Those blogs that I wrote, I mean, even though I wrote personal stuff, it's it's not on my mind a lot.
I love the way that you created a practice. And I know, like, we have a ceremony scheduled, and I'm going to be sure to keep the playlist or the music, or even maybe decide the music ahead of time with the facilitator, because um that everything you just said, I was resonating with so deeply from psilocybin experiences I've had with the this awareness of being in the body, so kind of stuck in the body, or that the tension being like really emphasized. um and that's so interesting that you had the two experiences, and it went from that to then completely, the out, being completely out. um
Mm.
yeah, I'm curious what you're thinking about.
I'm really like stuck with this sense of, yeah, like we haven't really tapped into the true fear of death yet.
Yeah.
And that, like, we've talked a little bit about it and how it might function, but Yeah, I notice it reminds me of this thing we talked about in an earlier discussion, Susan, about how a lot of people don't really think they're afraid of death.
Right.
Something that I disagree with them on. I think they are so
I do
incredibly
too.
afraid of death. Yeah. Um which I realize also is a projection on my end, but I it's like really when I am alone at night and the true reality of death like walks into the room, it feels so bottomless, the fear of it. Like there is no exhausting the true fear that there will come a time, and for me it's not just like I'm going to be gone, although that's a huge part of it, is there will be no more Jonathan, whatever that means, and there will be no and I'll be gone. But then it also drifts into like, and then at some point the sun will devour the earth, and no, and whatever life is still around then will be burnt to a crisp and disappear, and eventually the sun will drift away and like go cold, and like if I it's similar to thinking about how big the universe is. There's something about that that's terrifying, and death is so terrifying and infinite, and um yeah, there's I almost want to shout it out my window like, you fools, why,
Yeah.
how are you guys having a good day?
How are you not noticing this? Well, hey, hardly anybody is like you around death. I mean, not hardly anybody, but maybe 5% of the people. Most people, the fear of death is unconscious. It's just like most of our other core fears that run us. It's just unconscious. I can't expect people to go say, "Yeah, I have a fear of death." Um, I don't know. It's just, I mean, from what I've seen, people just don't feel that. They couldn't tolerate it. They could not tolerate the terror that they might momentarily experience. I don't think if you were fully embraced all the stuff that you said, I don't think you'd live in constant terror. But there's um, there's a great deal of defense mechanisms that feel like me. So it's good though that people start saying, "Yeah, I'm afraid of death, and here's what it's like for me." And I don't go nearly as deeply as you do, except in a certain intuitive part of my mind. And you may have this too. A lot of us who are born in these end times. I mean, these are sort of like end times. I mean, who knows how long the end times are going to be? But we have an intuition of things like the sun devouring the earth. We have various intuitions that they may be hundreds of years off in the future. So I'm not saying next week we're going to go extinct, but I think a lot of us who are born carry uh, that intuitive state of where humanity is now and where we're going, and that's what makes us want to be like thought leaders and kind of help the culture evolve. Because in a sense, I think the three of us are into that,
Yeah.
and probably a lot of the people that are your fans, and mine. So that's kind of that intuition thing, like, yeah, there's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. It's not about the Vietnam War anymore. It's about the life of the planet.
Mm.
What would there's like I hear in this kind of I was gonna say like an outrage or like a like why is nobody feeling this intensity? And I'm curious what it would look like
Mhm.
if more people did
Yeah.
have a were allowing more of this fear in. how would
Mm.
that change the world? How would that change, like, what would that do? What would that get us or
Yeah.
not get us? Or I because I think when I think about it for myself, I'm like, I don't know that it, like, consciously trying to sort of intensify my fear of death. Other Well, I mean, I guess I know from other inner work, like we were talking about earlier, that gets you some goods, like in terms of capacity and space holding and interacting with your brothers and your sisters and the world. So maybe that's what it would do. I
Mm.
mean, maybe that, opening the door more to our fear around death would make us, uh, or allow us to feel more love and openness for life and for
Yeah,
each
feel
other.
more of everything, really. I think you
Yeah.
might. So the first word that came to me when you started saying what you're saying, Sarah, is permission. So if
Mm.
a container with permission, and maybe a role model like Jonathan, like share his experience, and then, kind of like anybody else got anything going on like that? Because we used to do this back in the 60s with psychic experiences, and we're not talking about these, mystical experiences. Anybody, and all of a sudden, everybody's talking about it in a group. Now,
Right.
that's not unusual. Um, but so first of all, permission, and then I'm thinking of the teachings of Don Juan was one book, but several different books by Carlos Castaneda back in the 60s. The Don Juan sorcerer suggested keep death, right over your shoulder. In other words, you're always aware of it every minute, and it informs your actual life with paradoxically more presence, more kind of like you said, Sarah, more intense connection to what is now. Um, I can't remember that much about what else he said about that, but many
Yeah.
people, many people say things like, "When you know you're going to die, each moment is more precious." But that's kind of a platitude, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
there's more here that needs to be actually experienced.
Yeah,
And
it's
it could
something.
be. It's very intriguing, like let's do a workshop where everybody talks about death. You're going to one, aren't you, or something?
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna have. I know I'm gonna have. We have friends leading it, and I want to have one of them on to
Yeah,
talk about it. Yeah, I'm noticing just hearing in this conversation. I don't know if I would have thought like it would be good for people to have as razor wire sharp fear of death as I do. Like the kind of fear of death that opens up into like the furthest reaches that my mind can handle about thinking about reality. But then I'm realizing even as I'm saying that and hearing you two talk, it's like death is such a clear doorway into realms of being that are just bigger and bigger, and that you kind of um I don't it doesn't make it easier to go to the grocery store maybe, but like it definitely I think in doses and held in ceremony probably are ways to get to mystical states in a way. Like that's kind of what a mystical state is being able to hold
yeah.
the fullness of reality like just a little bit bigger than you're actually able to hold. That I feel like that's what a mystical experience all you need.
Yeah,
um
and words don't, it's like words don't ever do these things justice. So it
mm.
would be a little hard to, have a circle around that. And yet, you do what you can, and you just, you sort of like tap it like some kind of attunement process. What's coming up around the word death and experiences, and then just blurt out maybe one word like awe. A lot of people would say awe, but then some people would say terror. But we couldn't. It'd be hard to. Each of us is going to have a unique experience, and not that many are going to have as dramatic as you, Jonathan. But way more than they even realize now. Way more of the population it's not like painful feelings are good or bad. We're not really trying to like go for painful feelings. We're just trying to investigate with curiosity and openness this mysterious thing, and what it means to me and what it means to you will be different. They'll be unique.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't want your experience, Jonathan. But I am, after this conversation, I am going to just spend more time like taking my own advice and contemplating my own associations with death, my own feelings and
Yeah.
past experiences, and really doing that compassionate self-inquiry.
Something that I've not really connected with my fear of death, but has come up 3 times urgently while we've been talking today, is a related something that I feel related to a fear of death, which is like the pain of nostalgia, the like beautiful pain of nostalgia as like a I notice I have a little bit of an issue with going into on YouTube, Susan, they've got everything. And that includes like television blocks from when you were a child recorded with all the ads and stuff, and like for some reason I'll just watch television ads from that. I feel shame coming up talking about this, but like just I'll spend a lot of time looking at, yeah, like commercial media aimed at kids from when I was a kid, like in the 90s, and it will hurt so bad. It will make me sick to my stomach is the feeling. It's a nausea almost, and at the same time it's like yeah, there's also in my stomach there's nausea, but up here there's warm fuzzy feelings too, and it's like this ooey gooey weird shameful mixture of emotions that
Hmm.
if I open the door to that, it's very it requires a lot of effort to kind of pull myself out of. And I notice a lingering feeling when I do engage with media like that is just a deep sadness for the loss I've already experienced of myself.
Hmm.
Like I've already experienced me dying so many times. The child, all these versions of me that have died, and the life that went away when they died. I don't know. I'm like I never thought how that was connected until now, and it really wanted to be said.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh.
I believe that many people, as you're being socialized, into this culture, um, we cut off parts of ourselves, and like I used to think of it as you're a house and you have all these rooms in your emotional house, but then pretty soon you learn, don't go in that room, don't go in that room, and you're living in only a few rooms in your emotional house after you've gone through uh, acculturation process into a society that isn't really in harmony with real human needs or the needs of the planet for sure, and the fact that we're all interconnected and interdependent is not, our society doesn't promote the good use of cooperation and trust and helping each other. So, some of us are creating different cultural islands where we do that with each other to heal, to put more more animation in all the rooms in our house.
Mm.
But it's sort of, if you really tune in, like you are able to do, Jonathan, you do kind of, you review your whole life and you go, when did I lose that capacity? And when people get married, or coupled, I often will ask them, what about the things you used to enjoy that you no longer do now that you're in this partnership? And that's a whole other acculturation process. Is
Yeah.
having to, create a hopefully interdependent life with somebody, but you kind of, a lot of us are phobic about emotional pain, so we just like, well, we don't say that, we can't say that anymore, and it's sad.
Mm.
There's real grieving. Yeah. I saw something somewhere about a practice around grieving one's single life, like what's being left behind. I think I read a blog or something
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
Like couples that are deciding to be in these long term, like having like a grieving ceremony for what is
Really.
actually dying, like in them, that's available or was available to them and is no longer.
Yeah, I've facilitated those kind of things just one on one, with an individual couple, like just really feel because it's not normal to feel sad before you're going to get married. So, I was trying to like make it like, well, maybe it is normal, let's just see, so like naming the things that you're giving up, like, in many cases, variety of sexual partners. That's the obvious one for monogamous partners.
Mm.
And the couple doesn't want to talk about on the week before they're getting married. But the kind of clients who come to me, they do.
Yeah.
That's something that and Jonathan talk about a lot.
Yeah.
What sacrifices he made to be with Sai.
Yeah, I'm noticing there's this word grief comes up, and yeah, there's just so many things we grieve through our lives, and that when we living in a culture that kind of doesn't really hold a lot of space for death,
Yeah.
we don't really have a lot of grieving that goes on. We were just talking about today near where we live. There was this. I mean, it's on national news. An airplane ran into a helicopter.
In Washington, yeah.
Yeah, and it's heartbreaking, and it's shocking, and we all will fly and be worried, and but like it's fine, and then we get mad that it's late, and I don't know there, but it's like, oh yeah, it's like there's danger and these people died, and we should honor that. And then how quickly our culture go turns to like an outrage conversation where people are talking about like political figures or like political decisions or something, and it's like we're able or unwilling anymore to just like lament and grieve for a while, and that it's like y'all haven't even grieved yet, and you're mad and yelling, and you're going into this other game, this like high intensity conflict mind virus game. And yeah, I wonder if we were more skilled at grieving, what that would do, or like how that could change, on a societal level. Like we were talking about maybe being more engaged with fear of death on a personal level, but on a societal level, like what does that grieving get us? I think a lot, but I don't know.
Well, I was just talking to a client this morning about how she and so many people don't learn how to express emotions. And so many people go from uh, difficult situation to solution, bypassing their feelings about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so again, our movement is an antidote for that,
Yeah.
giving people first just some language, and then that helps you notice and feel and then the work that I do, trying to help people hold emotional discomfort for longer than is comfortable, but doing it intentionally and bringing a loving space to those hurting feelings. So that's a practice that would help people. Let me check with my emotions about that incident before I offer my solution.
Hmm.
I mean, there are some people that are just fixers by nature, and then their partner will say, just be with me and my feelings for a little bit. Well, that whole that's again a big cultural deficit, being with feelings rather than just go to action. and
Mm.
grief. And there is, just like death is more talked about now, since you and I have been talking about it, last couple months, even a couple months, it's noticeably more in the news and more it being written about. Same thing with grief. Last
Mm.
couple of years, grief is hot, death is hot, in terms of
Yeah.
uh, journalism. So
Yeah.
maybe your advice is we're moving more in that direction, at least being aware of those kind of things.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes.
Let's do it. Let's grieve and
Man, I
take
had
our time
quite
with it
a
and not.
grieving session last night. I was just inconsolably crying. It was like, oh my God, it was so. Ooh. A couple
Yeah,
of years ago, a crying session like that would have been so like tied up for me with like thoughts and the why and oh, and this thing that happened when I was a kid. And I had this experience of just being dropped into the grief and like opening up into just this like just full expression of the pain.
yeah,
I don't even know, it doesn't matter what the pain was, it was the pain, you
yeah.
know, it was
And
like
moving
something.
energy. You were
Yeah,
moving
yeah,
energy.
Mm.
And if humans could learn to trust, nature has a prescription for healing ourselves. It's just
yeah,
what you did. You just let yourself feel it. Let the feeling take you wherever it needs to for as long as it needs to. Now, that doesn't go well in a super achievement oriented society, but we can take back some control of our own
yeah,
lives. And it's known in psychological and spiritual circles that moving energy, it heals those frozen, traumatized places inside, even if you don't really understand what the freeze was even about. Happened when you were 3 months old.
and it's I think it's important. I like want for people to hear that, or as listeners, that it gets doing that as a practice, like allowing yourself to hold space for your emotional pain, it actually becomes something that you can rely on in yourself. It like, I'm not saying that you end up liking it, or like that I end up liking it. It's not a relationship of liking or not liking. It's like it becomes it's, what is the word? There is a
Capacity.
capacity, yeah,
Yeah,
that
Mm.
where I used to really not be able to hold emotional pain. I could not stand not feeling okay. I couldn't stand it, like stomping, like I can't handle it. Um, to where now it's like, gosh, how much I could handle more. I could handle a little more. I could
nice.
I could handle a little bit more. I don't know, just give me a little bit more.
Yeah, because when you're afraid of that kind of feeling and so forth, you wind up trying to control your environment. And you can't. So that's we cut our own self off, our own freedom of expression. You just have a lot less carefulness when we get to the place that you've gotten to where I like it when I can handle a little more.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
I have a request here at the end of our time. Other than any viewer or listener definitely checking out Getting Real by Susan Campbell, what are other ways that people can engage with your thinking, read what you're writing, or like buy your books? What's going on?
Well, my most recent book is From Triggered to Tranquil, and it describes in detail how to do this inner work. And since I've written that book, I've begun to practice doing that kind of process with anything that bothers you, world situations or whatever. Um, and then there's a book specifically about triggering in couple relationships. That's the book before from Trigger to Tranquil called 5-Minute Relationship Repair. Those are available at Amazon or any bookseller. And keep in mind, I wrote Getting Real 25 years ago. I mean, I've been a few places since then.
Yes.
It's so great that it's still popular. But
And it's a founding text in a movement that really saved me in a lot of ways. So I really admire it. Even if I imagine that you maybe moved on from it in some way, but it's like
not really, but I'd write it better.
yeah, right. But
Go
it's
ahead.
just such a foundational text that help develop these practices that are I commit my life to. So
Thank you. I'm still very much committed to everything that's in Getting Real. But I think from Trigger to Tranquil, and this trigger work is really the key to everything. It's sort of a summary of the path to
Yeah.
become a person with more capacity. And that's what personal transformation really is increasing your capacity to experience life to the fullest. And maybe even death to the fullest that you can while you're in a body. Who knows, I didn't put that in the book, but we're updating all this Getting Real stuff.
The container is now closed. It's a heavy conversation, and just listening to it has me feeling a lot of gratitude that we live in a world where elders like Susan Campbell are here to help us be a little bit more earthy with the way we think about these enormous topics like death. Something I really experience in Susan Campbell's presence is realness. And I know her book is called Getting Real, and that's like kind of a funny word to use, but when you're really there sitting and talking to her, you can feel that she's not lost in La La Land. She's not off on her own fantasies. She's just right here looking at things the way they really are and helping us to just kind of shake it off and look at it too and see things that maybe weren't available. We're really grateful to Susan Campbell for coming on, and we're grateful for you listening and joining us through this Lent season as we continue looking at the world through this unique lens of the relational arts. If you want to support this kind of work, remember to go to patreon.com/thecontainer. Make small monthly donations. And if you are interested in Susan Campbell's work, there are links down in the description below. And with that, we have a real nice way of closing. Keep it namaste.